I think one of the things I would say is that it is more important to invest in the marriage than in the wedding. The wedding takes place in one day. The marriage is for a lifetime thereafter. And there are couples who spend so much time getting ready for the wedding, but they didn't prepare for the marriage. Now, let me give you an example of what preparing for the marriage is. What we did in sitting down with a number of couples and listening and learning from them who had been married years before us and had walked this path we're about to walk, study after study after study shows that couples who go for premarital counseling and who sit down and talk about, this couple told us about the fight of how many children they eventually got. He wanted so many, she wanted so many, and they had to work it out. What are we going to do? Can we make decisions now, and etc. They told us about how they deal with their finances, and I've always been told, a woman should have a secret account, and a man should never disclose what his salary is to his wife, and etc. But this couple did it different, and they've had harmony in their finances. Going for premarital counseling makes a huge difference on the success of your marriage thereafter, because you're preparing. And a lot of couples don't know that. They fall in love, they are sort of overwhelmed by each other, involved in each other, and they don't have time for any of this until they get married, and then find they got to the other side, and we don't know what to do, and we don't know how to do this. And it's a little harder to ask for help, because when the conflicts begin, I stick with what African men do, and she sticks with what she's been told a wise woman does. And they're not able to resolve their conflicts. We went for counseling where we were told how to have fights in marriage, how to resolve the conflict, what's important to keep in front of you, the priorities of marriage, how to deal with finances, how to deal with in-laws, how to keep quoting each other after marriage, and all those sorts of things that really helped us, because we didn't know what we were doing. And so I think it's more important to prepare for the life after the wedding. The wedding is one day, but marriage is for a lifetime thereafter.
If you've never done marriage before, you don't know how to do marriage. So we are privileged that we had people who worked with us, but we invited them. I want to emphasize that, because people are careful not to enter your space unless you let them. So we had good people who helped us. So I don't think there are many things that surprised us. What is a surprise, and I think it's true for any couple, is how much adjustments you need to make. You live and have a conflict about how you've cut the carrots, because in one home things are always done a particular way. Somebody always shut the door. Like in my family, my father was always the one who checked the door. So you expect your spouse, but you grew up in a different context. The ground rules are different because of where you come from. So a long courtship allows you to have talked through things. But even when you do that, you will still be surprised by how many adjustments to make. So we went through our own adjustments. I don't think we had exceptionally difficult adjustments to make, but also we didn't have a lot of resources. So even just learning how to share what is there and what we're going to prioritize was a journey, and agreeing. And I remember, because we had made a commitment, we will build our marriage, we'll have a date night. In the beginning, we couldn't even afford to go out. We'll dress up and date in the house. Around a candle. So I remember that we needed to make adjustments, because you could have the expectations of what you'll be doing. I don't think they were overwhelming, but they were very real. It was a surprise to see how many adjustments you make that first year.
When you get married, the first year, the first 5 years, everything's working against you, because you come into marriage with a picture of what you think a good marriage is. And your picture has been developed, from several things. One, from the books you've read. And in those days, we all used to read Mills and Boons and those sorts of things and pick up, hints there about romance and courtship. You come into a marriage because you watched your parents' marriage. And there are things your dad used to do and things your mom used to do that you assume your spouse is going to do. You come into marriage having watched a number of movies, and they shape you, okay? One of the movies that sort of was huge in our days was, can I even remember the name of it? Something Seattle.
Sleepless in Seattle.
Yeah, Sleepless in Seattle, for example. Okay, it's a romantic story, very sort of touching on the heartstrings and such. So you imagine this is what your marriage is going to be like, okay? You have heard songs, all those, sort of woeful songs that you listen to in our days, the Jackson 5, and they shape an idea of what romance and marriage is going to be like. The problem is the stories and the parental, lessons I learn and the books I read and the movies I watch are not what she's watching, are not what she's read. So she has a different picture, and we're both sure that my picture is right and your picture needs to reform to my picture. And so I come home in the evening, and my father always used to come home and sit in his chair that nobody else sat in. And in 5 minutes, there's a cup of tea that magically appears because my mom would be in the kitchen and hurry it up. He's come home, he's tired, give him a cup of tea. And I come home and I sit there, and she comes home and she sits there. And I'm thinking to myself, where's my cup of tea? And she's thinking to herself, what a lovely moment we have together, sitting together here. And I'm beginning to get frustrated and annoyed, but she doesn't know what's going on inside me because I'm working with a software that she doesn't have. And only when I can say, my father always used to get a cup of tea magically when he came home. Why don't I get one? And then she says, well, in our house, my father always served that cup to my mother. And so I'm sitting here waiting, and so everything's working against you. And having the humility to say, I'm feeling frustrated now and I'm feeling, unhappy because every day I come home, you never give me a cup of tea. And then she says, I didn't know I was supposed to do that. And then I have to say, really? I mean, didn't your mother used to do this for your father? No. You have to have those conversations. and to do so amicably without getting into a fight, without assuming you should know better than this, every woman serves a cup of tea. That's difficult, and that's where the conflicts begin. And so the first 5 years are big adjustment. It was interesting at one point looking at Kenya. A lot of couples get divorced around the 5th year. If you go to the records, judiciary records, and check, the divorce is granted around year 5, year 6, year 4, somewhere there. And what's happening is they had a really rough, bad first year. By the 2nd year, they were fighting tooth and nail, okay? They decided to separate at the 2nd year. And by, the 2.5 year, 3rd year, they have gone their separate ways and they're drifting apart. So one of them files for divorce. And then it takes 2 years for this thing to be settled. So you think they got divorced in the 5th year. But it was actually the first 1.5 years where they separated. And this was just the legal process happening. That first year is crucial. It really is a foundational year. And if it doesn't work, you'll see the results, the fruit of that 5 years later when they get divorced. Yeah.
Okay. What are some of the adjustments you had to make yourself?
In the first 5 years?
Yes.
I remember in the first year, I got sick. And my young husband asked me, what do you want? And I burst into tears and said, I want my mother. It was, now we laugh about it. But it was the realization, before I got married, if I got sick, I went to bed. And somebody else took care of me. Now I was sick, but I still had the responsibilities of caring for the home, caring for... So just that adjustment of the responsibility of caring for home and the things that went with it, I can remember that I had, even though intellectually I knew, coming to marriage and having to maneuver that was not so easy. But we had a lot of help because we did have a couple. We had a very special couple who hovered around us every month. They would be around us and we would process what are we experiencing. Everything was an experience for me. You work harder. They like to say men have it better than the women. They like to say that because truly my roles, I can see my roles increased. My responsibilities increased. And I don't think anything could have prepared me for that. Now, I am blessed because I had a spouse who was committed, not because he knew everything, but committed to growing a relationship and being a good husband, and he supported. But in my own personal journey, I had to make that psychological and very practical adjustment of roles and responsibility. Yeah.